Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war. I've already done a shorter one on looting earlier, that was an extra, just answering a challenge I put to people. So go and check that out. Challenge to pro-Russian voices as to what they do with video evidence of Russian troops looting, how do they justify that, and where does it leave them? So just did a one on that. I'm just going to do a couple of little things before we get on to a couple of pieces from previous videos from this morning. I cut out a longer piece on Moldova that I thought I'd put is better in the extra than the news. And yesterday, some long threads from Mick Ryan and Thomas Tyner that I've put together. So that'll come later. Just a couple of short bits. Interesting to see stuff like this. This is clusters of Russian Project 436 target barges around the Kerch Strait, which is the connection of the Russian mainland to the Crimean Peninsula via the Crimean Bridge, the Kerch Bridge. These barges consist of 9 radar reflectors used in an attempt to confuse radar-guided weapons and aircraft. So these sort of ping off radar signals and whatnot and just confuse, as it says, radar-guided weapons and aircraft. And the idea is that this would protect the bridge, I presume in this case, from getting hit with guidance missiles that have guidance systems on board and so on and so forth. Don't know how much use these are really. There was talk about these in place earlier in the war, and places were still struck with these nearby. That's just in my long distant memory there. I can't remember fully. Anyway, moving on to what Trent Tilenko says. He says this analysis is pretty much spot on. This made me think of a number of different things. So this is just some random saying this, really. But this is kind of, well, some people are saying 20 to 50-ish Leopards are going to Ukraine due to the sad shape of the European fleet. It was going to take 20 years to fix everything. And yes, 6 months ago, I would agree. But today, not. Germany knows that if they don't get a Leopard fleet in the field as soon as they can, it can kiss goodbye to future contracts. US, Korean and others are coming. Now you will see panic production of parts and servicing of Leopard 1s and 2s to get them to Ukraine as soon as possible. They don't want to end up like the Swiss defense industry. I think the number of German tanks in the field soon will be a surprise overall. Fear of losing money is a big motivator. And it's got this kind of joke sliding scale up to, holy crap, the Americans are coming. We need to get the German arms production up. Now, what this makes me think is that there's so much about this war that is being led by or affected by or prompting action in the arms industry. And we often talk about the military industrial complex, and whether you like it or not, it's involved. These private military companies are involved in this war and are huge important components of this war, for good or bad, right? However, when it comes to something like the Leopards and the German situation and Rheinmetall and these sort of big companies, there's a lot to think about when talking about whether you're going to help Ukraine. So Germany is saying, right, we're going to help Ukraine, but actually, oh my goodness, armed forces are in the shambles, as in we need to spend an awful lot of money, revamping it. And that means that as a result of them being in the shambles, because we haven't revamped it, our arms industry is lagging behind and the production is really low. At the moment, the German arms industry is just getting by at a rate that is not producing enough to sustain even German revamping of their own armed forces, let alone supporting Ukraine. And then you've got the consideration of what Germany wants as far as being or Rheinmetall or any of these companies in the German military industrial complex, where they want to be in terms of global sales and a global arms presence. You've got Korea saying, hello, we'll make anything, and then you can make it indigenously at home, like I talked to you about in a previous video. You've got Americans arms manufacturers saying, yep, we are big and we're here. Abrams, everyone's talking about Abrams. Brilliant. You want to buy some Abrams? Awesome. Okay, let's do that. And Germany going, oh, hang on, what's going on here? And they've really got to put up or not even shut up, put up or don't exist. So this is a time, and money is a great motivator. It's going to be a really interesting time to see how, if you're German, see how arms the German arms industry reacts to issues in Ukraine and the need for stuff, right now, and how arms industries around the world will as well. So we talked before about Switzerland, their neutrality positioning, meaning that their arms industry is arguably going to be a bit screwed, financially going forward, economically speaking. Just there will be so much about how different countries support this war that is dependent on the situation of their arms industry. In Britain, we can only give so many challenges because actually we don't make the parts anymore, because we don't have the Challenger was never one that was exported widely, which means that you don't have the supply and the parts and the maintenance industries that go along with that, and the manufacturing industry has basically shut down on that tank effectively. So we can only provide as many as we can, i.e. not many, because we need to support our own tanks and we can't make those parts anymore. So we have to cannibalize other tanks that we've got in storage. So in a perfect world, let's give Ukraine like 100 Challenger 2 tanks and then we could build some more. That's not going to happen because we're not building them, because it's building them is reliant on a buoyant market for those tanks. If there isn't that buoyant market, then we'll stop making the parts, we'll stop making the tanks, and then Britain is unable to help Ukraine further down the line, and our own tanks are in a state of disrepair themselves. So there's so much to consider when helping Ukraine, that is not just about governments having the will to do things, but it's also the governments having the ability to do things, which is itself dependent on the market, the defense industry having the ability to make these things. So here it is. This is Thomas Tyler saying Germany ordering just 10 Panzerhaubitze 2000s is damaging the German defense industry. 10 are not enough. 10 are just enough to keep the production line open, but in times like ours, an expansion of production is needed. In Europe, and all those countries need to replace their older self-propelled artillery. Germany, Spain, France, Portugal, Austria, looks like Bulgaria and Romania. While Italy, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Croatia and Greece need more Panzerhaubitze 2000s, and Ukraine needs masses of them. Germany's future army organization requires around 90 new Panzerhaubitze 2000s. In total, Europe has a need of around 500 armored self-propelled howitzers. With the current production line, it would take around 30 years to build. That number of Panzerhaubitze 2000s, to build that number, as long as Germany itself doesn't commit to buy more Panzerhaubitze 2000s, it is better for a nation to buy the South Korean K9 Thunder, of which around 60 are produced every year. If Germany orders 100 of these, then other European nations will buy them too, especially if Germany keeps new Panzerhaubitze 2000s and sells its older ones at a lower price. That is how Germany came to dominate the main battle tank market: buy 3000 plus Leopard 2s and then sell older ones to allies at a lower price. South Korea is going to dominate this market soon too. It's a really, I think that's basically just what I've been trying to say, but in far fewer words. 10 Panzerhaubitze 2000s is not enough to kind of lubricate the machines of manufacture in Germany, and that will not then bring the economies of scale down. You need to produce more to get all the other supply and parts manufacturing working well, and to bring the cost of each unit down. So therefore, the Panzerhaubitze 2000 will not be attractive to other countries to come and buy, because they don't have the economies of scale and the unit costs are that high. So they go to somewhere else like South Korea. And Germany then loses out, not just that company, but the tax revenue for the manufacturing taking place in the country. So the argument is Germany need to spend a lot of money as a government on their defense industry, buying a whole load of Panzerhaubitze 2000s, replace them all, or give a load to Ukraine or whatever. You need to get that stimulus going, so that other people are looking at that these pieces of equipment are thrown around the world, in this case around Ukraine, and being used really well, so other people look at them and say they're tried and tested and they work and they're good, we want to buy them, and then making enough of them so that the unit costs are lower. So you're saying and they're reasonable to make, so you get, yeah, right, we're in here and we're going to buy from Germany, and then Germany as a whole does well out of that. But that's not happening, and so people go to South Korea, people go to United States instead. And yeah, there is this idea that if Germany as a government aren't going to spend a lot of money on their defense industry, then the defense industry will fail, and other countries and other companies will succeed and take that market share away from them. It's happened in some aspects. The UK tank manufacturing doesn't seem to be there. It's happened to us. So you need to sell a lot of these things, and you might need to do some of that buying yourself as a government in order to have the success that you want out of your defense industry. However, military industrial complex, I can't believe I'm advocating for that. I'm not really. I mean, this is just basic kind of economics. It just happens to be in the defense industry. Anyway, over to the other stuff that I have recorded. And then finally, this is Michael Weiss again and Holger Runemer. They reported a similar one on Belarus, that Russia has a plan for Belarus, and a document was leaked that was the Russian plan, their strategy for Belarus. Well, now another document has been leaked, which is a strategy for Moldova. Moldova is the nation to the west of Ukraine, the southwest of Ukraine, borders Ukraine, has a breakaway area of Transnistria that the Russians have about 1,500 soldiers in. Anyway, it's been in the news, there have been protests. On Friday, John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, made a surprise announcement at a White House press briefing. US intelligence, he said, had determined that the Kremlin was plotting to topple another European democracy. Quote, Russian actors, some with current ties to Russian intelligence, are seeking to stage and use protests in Moldova as a basis to foment a manufactured insurrection against the Moldovan government, he declared. And then, as if on schedule, Moldova experienced an anti-government demonstration on Sunday, just 2 days later. Thousands of people waving the blue, yellow and red Moldovan flags marched through the streets of downtown Chisinau, the capital, past the National Parliament and Executive Building. Down with Maya Sandu, they chanted, referring to Moldova's outspokenly pro-European president. Local police arrested 54 demonstrators for violating public order, almost half of them minors. Police also alleged that 4 bomb threats were made throughout the country, one at the international airport, and they'd stopped suspecting mercenaries from the Wagner group from entering the country in a week in which 181 other foreigners tried to do likewise. Okay. Yahoo News has obtained an internal strategy document from Putin's presidential administration that reveals Moscow's plans for Moldova. The document originates from the same presidential directorate for cross-border cooperation that produced a similar strategy previously reported on by Yahoo News concerning Russian plans to annex Belarus. The Moldova strategy, according to the source who leaked it, was drafted in the fall of 2021. So autumn before the war, like its Belarusian counterpart, with input from Russia's general staff and Moscow's main intelligence services, the FSB, SVR, and GRU. The Russian strategy for Moldova focuses on, quote, countering the attempts of external actors, primarily the United States, the countries of the European Union, and the Republic of Turkey and Ukraine, to interfere in the internal affairs of the Republic of Moldova, to strengthen the influence of NATO and weaken the positions of the Russian Federation. End quote. It envisions Moldova joining the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, Moscow's answer to the EU, and a collective security treaty organization, CTSO, its version of NATO, and the plan seeks the neutralization of any actions by the Moldovan government to expel the Russian military presence in Transnistria, a Moscow-backed breakaway republic that is internationally recognized as part of Moldova. And then it goes on later. According to the Western intelligence official, the Kremlin's goal is to put Moldova back into Russian sphere of influence. Putin's arsenal in this regard is not tanks and fighter jets, as with Ukraine, but the weapons of political warfare, infiltrating the country with Russian intelligence operatives and fomenting anti-democratic activity using paid or ideologically loyal agents of influence. In October, the German newspaper Deutsche Welle reported that protesters were earning the equivalent of €20, $19 per day, and €80 per night, a significant sum for the average Moldovan. Elena Marciak, a Moldovan security analyst who spent 9 years working with the Moldova NATO cooperation, said that some of the protesters from poorer areas have been compensated with as little as €10 a day, a claim Yahoo News could not independently verify. Moldovan journalists, meanwhile, have posted videos to social media of drunken demonstrators boasting about the money they had received. So basically, Russia is trying to destabilize Moldova, has very serious plans for doing it, and there is a strategy, a paper, there is a document to confirm this. Moscow, as per the document, seeks the neutralization of attempts to limit the activities of Russian and pro-Russian media in Moldova, the creation of a network of NGOs, so those are non-government organizations promoting the development of Russian-Moldovan relations, and the expansion of opportunities for Moldovan students to receive education in the Russian language. In a clear sign that the strategy document was written or edited at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, it even cites remote or distance education as a viable means for satisfying the last criterion. By 2025, Russia would like a, quote, sustainable functioning of the system of organizational, financial, legal, and information support of NGOs friendly to the Russian Federation. And then the article goes on to talk about how they haven't really been paying enough attention to Russian TV in Moldova and around, and how these methods of controlling the information space are hugely important. And it kind of goes on. Throwing a couple of rockets is not a big deal. Rutsayan told Yahoo News of Russian forces in the province. Militarily, Russia can't advance from Transnistria. Instead, Rutsayan said, Moscow relies on provocations and stunts, active measures in the parlance of Russian intelligence. Hint, go and watch Active Measures on Amazon Prime. If you've got Amazon Prime, Active Measures is a phenomenal documentary that details that there's so much information in that you just can't take it all in, of Russian interference in the US election cycle and all the stuff to do with Trump. Now, I know many of you would be like, it's complete, it's load rubbish. It's not. Go and check that documentary out and look at the wealth of data that's there. Just a phenomenal amount of data, because you'd have to refute all of that to refute that Russia had been involved in US democratic mechanisms in the parlance of Russian intelligence, meant to undermine faith in the Moldovan government. One scare tactic is to suggest that Chisinau's pro-European policymaking is leading the country to war with Russia, a playbook similar to the one used in pro-Russian politicians in Georgia. So there you go. That's the end of the geopolitics section. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about Moldova because it is important. Russia are involved there. They are fomenting those protests, as I talked about in a previous video. There's evidence, there's planning evidence of that. There's evidence that people are being paid, and all sorts. So, Russia are involved there. It is a problem for the EU and for the US and for pro-Ukrainian people going forward, and for Ukraine itself, because if Moldova becomes a vassal state or a satellite state of Russia, then Ukraine is somewhat surrounded. Anyway, thank you. Take care. Speak to you later in the Frontline Update. Right, Thomas Tyner. Let's get on to another big, long thread because, hey, why not? I talked you through this thread. Challenger 2, Leopard 2A56, M1A1 or 2 Abrams will roam across the Ukrainian steppe to hunt and destroy Russian army. And he talked about how it's not just about tanks, it's about combined arms initiatives. It's about, all these different aspects of the tanks. How you support them, etc., 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 and I talked you through that, and my, didn't we have fun together? Well, now he's doing another thread that I will take you through as well, and we can enjoy the time that we spend with Thomas C. Tyner. So earlier I posted, I think he was a former artilleryman. Earlier I posted a thread about how Abrams, Leopard, and Challenger, and Bradley, Marder, and CV90. So those first three are tanks, modern main battle tanks. And there's an interest, we could talk about what is a main battle tank and what's the difference between old school heavy tank, medium tank, and light tank. And this new thing that came along sort of slipped into parlance within the past, I don't know how many years. But now you get main battle tank, and then some people arguing, well, what's the difference? And anyway, that's another discussion. But these last three are infantry fighting vehicles: Bradley, which is the American one, Marder, German, and CV90, which is a Swedish one. CV90s, quite excited about seeing those in Ukraine, because these are supposed to be, some argue that these are the best in the world. for a bunch of reasons. They've got really good fire control system that also stabilization as well, and just seem to be very good. But I don't know that they've been actually used in battle as much as, say, the Bradley. Anyway, come on, Pierce, get on with it. Combined with their infantry and armoured support vehicles during a combined arms attack. As people asked about the supporting and sustainment elements of the combined arms attack, I will do now a thread about these. Please read my earlier thread. Right, we've done that. Reconnaissance. So commanders need to know where the enemy is, where he has concentrated his forces, where he moves to or retreats. So when he did a thread yesterday that I read you through about how he would organize an attack that would breach the defenses, trenches, and minefields, he spent a lot of time saying, Recce, you've got to recon with drones as much as you can all the time. Send hundreds of drones up. Yeah, you're going to lose a bunch, but just you've got to do that. It's all about recon. Information is power. Knowledge is power, isn't it? Sorry, not information. Knowledge is power. So ground and air assets of a brigade's recon battalion reconnaissance ahead of the armoured spearhead. Nowadays, drones are the most used recon asset, but before the ubiquitousness of drones, helicopter recon and reconnaissance planes like the RF-4E Phantom were key aerial recon elements. Ground recon comes in many forms, from long-range reconnaissance patrols to armoured reconnaissance with tanks. What kind of recon is chosen depends on terrain and enemy. And if you scout or probe the former, the former observes the enemy but doesn't engage him, while the latter engages him and gains intelligence from his reaction. So you hear about reconnaissance and reconnaissance in force. To scout, you use easy to disguise small armored cars like these Dutch or German Fennec. And I wonder if they're called Fennec because is that the Fennec fox that has big ears? So this is like hiding out with big ears, checking out what's listening in, and so on and so forth. I may know, but it may not be correct. To probe, you attack with something with more firepower, i.e. Italian Army Centauro tank destroyers, French Army AMX-10RC, which they are getting, the Ukrainians, or US Army M3A3 Bradley cavalry fighting vehicles, or British Army Ajax scout vehicles. But there are also vehicles that combine scouting and probing. Looks like it's made out of Meccano, that. Like the French EBRC Jaguar, which is an armoured car with 40mm autocannon and Acheron MMPs. So Acheron are sort of ATGM sort of thing. They are anti-tank guided missiles as far as I understand them. A bit like with the Bradleys with the TOW missile systems on top. There is a lined missile system that is pretty effective. So like these with the autocannon and the Acheron MMPs, or the Norwegian CV-90 Mark 3B Recce, which is an infantry fighting vehicle with added reconnaissance capabilities, like that massive floodlight that seems to be poking out the back. In the coverless steppe of southern Ukraine, armoured reconnaissance and drones will be used. As he goes on, in wooded northern Luhansk, scouting and drones will be used. So once the enemy's location and composition is clear, you want to hit him with artillery, for which you have forward artillery observation vehicles like the Swedish EBB V90 or the M7 Bradley fire support vehicle. I talked to you about this Bradley M7 in one of my videos some time back. The Americans have given these to the Ukrainians, so worry not. These vehicles will direct artillery and mortar fire onto the enemy positions, and you have to have self-propelled artillery because your howitzers must be able to keep up with your attack formations, and they must be able to start firing quickly once the enemy is discovered. Although I did see a video yesterday on Military and History that showed a M777 being taken down. It fired and was taken down and hooked up within a minute and a half, which is fantastic. So if you are that quick, you could do that. So they must be able to start firing quickly once the enemy has been discovered. You will also need mobile artillery radars to discover from where enemy artillery fires at your armored spearhead, and M270 MLRS, so multiple launch rocket systems with gimbalers rockets to hit enemy positions that were newly discovered or were already known and only now come into range. And there you go. Bit of gimbaler activity. If there is a river to cross, you have to ready a water crossing engineer unit with, for example, the improved ribbon bridge, which can be used as a pontoon bridge or as ferries. If Ukraine wants to cross the Dnipro River in Kherson Oblast, it will need a lot of such bridge elements. And here we go. This is how you then can make a big bridge like that. But you can see the amount of kit you're going to need to do that. And this is one of these sort of pontoon ferry type bridges that we saw in Kherson after the bridges themselves were taken out by Ukrainian HIMARS activity. An armored spearhead also needs armored command and control vehicles and signal units to ensure communication between all parts of the spearhead function properly. Command and control, that's sometimes C2C, I think, is it? And signal is communications. Also, you better bring military police along to secure the rear, command posts, supply points, and POWs. Now, the Ukrainians have been training up special, I forget what they're called. Let's go and look what they're called. That's it. It's the offensive guard, and Zelensky's trained, I think, 28,000 of these, and these are designed for exactly that: to go into the places that are liberated after they've been liberated, to mop up stuff and to get things, get people helped there, to get things sorted, get it to be structured and orderly, rather than actually doing the frontline fighting themselves. So that is the offensive guard, and that will be part of their offensive. And this is like the huge task it is doing this counteroffensive to come. Is not just about, right, let's get a bunch of vehicles, right, let's go for it. Woo! It's about, okay, have we got all the vehicles we need for bridging, for mine clearing, for command and control, for communication? We've got counter battery radar, we've got logistics change, we've got fuel, have we got this, we've got that. Okay, and once we've got this all together and we use it properly, then what happens once we've advanced and liberated areas? Okay, we need the offensive guard, we need them trained up. Do they know what they're doing? How do they get things sorted behind the lines? They need to sort out logistics, they need to sort out, make sure that all the population are being seen to in the correct way. They're getting the administration sorted out that once these areas have been liberated, so on and so forth. So it's just a huge undertaking. Right, he continues: electronic warfare vehicles, mortar carriers, artillery ammo carriers, air defense, engineer units to repair your lines of communication. All this is needed and needs to be readied before an attack can begin. Exactly what I was just saying. And that is a US M992A2 field artillery ammunition supply vehicle. So again, this is a vehicle that's just supplying ammunition to the front. Also, a combat hospital combat support hospital is key if you care about your troops, and enough armored ambulances to bring your wounded troops out of the combat zone. In fact, Luxembourg is giving 14 armored ambulances to Ukraine, so that's great. If you can use medical evacuation helicopters, even better, but then your logistics becomes much more complicated. Logistics, the biggest and most complicated of all the elements, and the most important. You have to bring fuel, ammo, food, and water to your frontline troops. They must never run out of anything. You need huge logistics depots behind the front and a vast fleet of trucks. I mean, it's phenomenal. There's a counteroffensive of the potential size that there could be just needs a huge amount of thought and work. Anyway, these trucks need to be continuously ferrying supplies forward. Trucks have to run 24/7, and the maintenance crews have to fix every broken truck, no matter how little sleep they had. You must be able to refuel an entire Bradley company in minutes and bring enough ammo for the entire battalion. If your logistics can't keep up with the speed of your advance, well, if you're the US Army, then you fly fuel and ammo in, because you never want to lose momentum. Once the enemy is once the enemy is on the run, you've got to keep him running. So plan your logistics accordingly. And remember, too many supply trucks is always still too few supply trucks. Talk about momentum. Mick Ryan's done a really good thread on this. I really should add that onto the end of this. But there you go. Ukraine doesn't have air supremacy yet, but once you achieve that, you want a lot of air assets in the air to cover your spearhead from enemy air attacks and to smite enemy units before they even come close to your troops. This requires a lot of coordination between air assets and ground forces. That is why you have joint terminal attack controllers who direct close air support, CAS, from a forward position. But once you get close air support, you also need fighter jets, which will protect your CAS aircraft from enemy fighters. And you need fighters that suppress enemy air defenses, SEAD operations, so suppression of enemy air defenses, hitting their radars, hitting their anti-aircraft missile systems, like this Eurofighter with an air-to-air load of Meteor, AIM-120 and Iris-T missiles, and these two F-16CM Block 50 with a SEAD load of AGM-88 HARM missiles. So these are the anti-radar missiles, the HARM missiles, I don't know which ones they are actually, that will take out radar installations. Naturally, if you have fighter cover, you can use your attack helicopters, which are crudely said flying infantry fighting vehicles with an autocannon to annihilate infantry and light armored vehicles, anti-tank guided missiles to destroy tanks, and unguided rockets to destroy everything else. If your Apaches, Vipers, Mangusta Tiger can fly, so can your Predators, Reapers, Bayraktars, etc. The advantage of combat drones is naturally they can immediately destroy an enemy position they have just discovered. Combined arms is a complex art, and NATO armies continuously train every aspect and element again and again and again. Well-planned and executed combined arms attacks can crush the Iraqi army in 4 days. Ukraine will receive a full armored brigade set of tanks, IFVs, and support vehicles from the US. Training how to seamlessly use these will take some time, but they learn from the best, UK, US, etc. Last but not least, the tank is an integral part of combined arms. Without it, you will not succeed. Only people who know nothing about combined arms say nonsense like tanks are a death trap now. I wonder who he's referring to. Tanks are the tip of the spear, with which Ukraine will slice through the Russian front and liberate the south and east and Crimea. Just learn and master combined arms before you attack. And there he goes. So that's the end of his big old thread there. Really interesting, and it's just, I mean, just looking at the sheer range of activities and equipment that are involved in doing a full offensive makes you realize how much preparation they are going to need. And this is why I've been saying the last few days that this counteroffensive, some people are saying it's going to happen next week, a couple of weeks, you'll see, there'll be a big counteroffensive. No, I can't see a proper counteroffensive happening for 3 months plus, because the Ukrainians are only going to get one chance of doing this. Like, they've got to do it right. If you rush into this, it's a bit like the Russians. If this is their offensive because they've rushed into it, blah blah blah, then they've done it wrong, and they're not prepared, and they haven't done things, and they're not very good at combined arms offensives. Ukraine have one real chance to succeed, and they have to succeed. And so I assume they're going to make sure all their ducks are in a row. And once all those ducks are in a row, they're going to launch them as hard as they can at the Russians. So poor ducks. So dagnammit, I'm changing what I was going to finish with. I'm going to finish with yet another massive thread, but that's because Thomas Tyner just talked about momentum and how important it is to keep that going. And Mick Ryan's done a pretty significant thread on that, and it would be ridiculous if I didn't join these two ideas together. So do forgive me, and this might go on a little bit. Okay, Mick Ryan, former Australian general, says, in military operations, we often speak about momentum and seizing the initiative. It's a term used in military publications and heavily emphasized in leadership and operations. Today, an examination of whether Russia is generating momentum in Ukraine. The essence of seizing the initiative is gaining a position of advantage relative to an enemy and denying the enemy their objectives. Military leaders seek to disrupt enemy decision-making, make their plans irrelevant, and force the enemy to respond to friendly initiative. At the beginning of Russian invasion, the Russians seized the initiative. Despite the extraordinary courage of Ukraine's defenders, Russian army forces were able to seize over 20% of Ukraine and keep Ukraine on the defensive for the first 6 months of the war. From the middle of 2022, this began to change. In the east, the Ukrainians made the Russians pay dearly for every meter of ground gained. While the Russians may have seized Luhansk Oblast, they did so at enormous cost in humans and equipment that hardly justified the amount of territory gained. The exhaustion of Russian forces that resulted from this eastern campaign and the introduction of the long-range strike capabilities of HIMARS saw initiative bleed away from the Russian army. This set the scene for Ukrainian counteroffensives in the south and the east. As Kaufman and Lee have written, the Russian and Kaufman is the same Kaufman I talk about I've mentioned his podcast the other day, and also Rob Lee is someone who I dip into occasionally. He's another really good analyst, and they often write together. So as they have done here, Kaufman and Lee have written, the Russian continuation of their eastern campaign, when the huge costs outweighed minor territorial gains, partially underpinned the September-November Ukrainian offensives. In the wake of the Ukrainian successes in late 2022, the strategic and tactical initiative rested with Ukraine. Even with the brutal Russian missile and drone campaign against Ukrainian civilians and infrastructure, Russia was unable to build any momentum in their operations. Ukraine appeared poised for additional offensive operations over winter, even if at a smaller scale than those of the preceding months. However, slow arrival of Western aid, including artillery and munition shortfalls, probably precluded this. The large equipment and munitions commitments in December and January by NATO were probably a recognition that they may have missed a good opportunity to further weaken Russia at the end of 2022, and that they needed to ensure they did not make the same mistake in 2023. So this is the idea. You have a tension between, right, keep going, and people are saying this at the end of the Kharkiv lightning counteroffensive, where they culminated, but other people are saying, no, you need to keep going in that momentum because they're really weak, and if you keep going, you can get even further. And they're like, yeah, but we've exhausted ourselves, and we don't have the supply chains in place, etc., etc. And you have this tension of like wanting to go for momentum, but not wanting to overextend yourself and do it badly. And so if 2022 would have been a great time to continue their momentum, but unfortunately they didn't have the equipment, it didn't come in soon enough, and then you need the training and you need all the things in place for all of that to be used. And this unfortunately allows the Russians to then build up all their defenses, all their trenches, revetments, dragon's teeth, minefields, etc., etc. So that's why it's important to capitalize on momentum, but it's got to be optimal. You can't just keep going forever. In January, Russian Surovikin, seen as too defensive, was replaced by Gerasimov. The Russians began their 2023 offensive campaign. They attacked at multiple locations in eastern Ukraine and absorbed the Battle of Bakhmut into the larger Russian eastern offensive. So far, the campaign appears to have some operational unity. It is in the east, but there has been little imagination or surprise generated by Russian forces. They apply brute force, but gains have been marginal and their losses heavy, especially for Eastern Russians. This graph from Warmapper demonstrates just how marginal Russian gains have been so far in 2023. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces have fought hard and taken significant losses, although these appear to be significantly less than the Russians. So we have, at the beginning of the war, the Russians made huge gains, and then Ukrainians made some gains back, and then the Russians a little bit, and then Ukraine a bunch more. That was Kherson. I think this was Kharkiv. Or no, that might have been the end. That's April. No, this was when they moved back from Kyiv, and then we had this would be Kharkiv and then Kherson, and then since then the Russians have done really very little. Around Vuhledar, multiple Russian assaults using mechanized, armored, and dismounted troops have founded on Ukrainian defenses. floundered, I think. This has destroyed some of the better remaining Russian combat brigades, but remains an ongoing battle. In Bakhmut, the Russians have thrown huge Wagner and army resources into their attempt to seize the town. As I've written previously, the value of the small city, and people do disagree on this, does not justify the expense in lives, equipment, and munitions. There's been some talk recently, actually, that Bakhmut has, I think, Artur on is it Artur Ray on YouTube has interviewed someone that said if Bakhmut falls, then they do have line of sight to these other towns behind, and that it is useful for the Russians to attack Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Konstantinivka, so on and so forth. So it does have some kind of at least localized importance. Further north, Russian forces are continuing their attacks in the Kupiansk-Svatovo-Kremna direction, although these attacks have resulted in only minor gains. When the army undertakes large-scale operations like the Russians have over the past couple of months, they seek to generate momentum. This is physical, in that it requires movement, maneuver, battle, and the capture of ground and destruction of the enemy. Momentum also has a psychological dimension. In conducting an offensive campaign, the Russians want to shape the perceptions of Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian government, journalists, and Western governments to believe that they have the capacity to attack for as long as it takes. So the Russians, having shaken off the defensive mindset that Surovikin imbued, are on the move again. They've generated some momentum in the past 2 months, but they have not yet seized the initiative strategically, nor on the ground in the east. Ukraine appears to be keeping its powder dry. Not only is it re-equipping and rearming with Western donated arms, but it is also forming new units as well as stockpiling munitions and supplies for its forthcoming offensive operations. The timing and place of these offensive actions will be crucial for Ukraine. They will need to assess where tactical success is possible, but also where they might achieve a deep operational level penetration to dislocate the Russian defensive scheme in an entire region. So, we will need to be patient to assess who has the initiative on the ground in the east. Only when the Ukrainians have launched their offensive and the results of it are obvious can such a judgment be made. Bakhmut may have some impact, but if Ukraine does cede ground in the east as a tactical realignment, it will not be the same as Ukraine is losing the war. Russia will want Western populations to believe this, but Bakhmut is hardly a strategic center in this war. In summary, we could observe that Russia has probably launched its offensive at a time that is disadvantageous for them, and this favours Ukraine. While much remains to be seen in the coming months, Gerasimov's offensive may actually be rushing his army to failure. So there you go. So that's the importance of maintaining momentum and gaining initiative, and with that initiative, creating momentum. But momentum isn't just about that physical momentum on the battlefield of actually taking territory, of doing the fighting, and the psychology of the troops involved. It also affects the psychology of the population of Ukraine, the psychology of supporters around the world, the psychology of detractors around the world, the governments involved in this. So Ukrainian momentum on the battlefield has multifarious ramifications that is worth understanding. It's just so important. So then it goes back to this point. So they have to get it right. The Ukrainians really need to get this right, and they will require a huge amount of preparation, a huge amount of supplies, a huge amount of expertise, a huge amount of people, and there needs to also be a lot of secrecy, like where these supply hubs are being where all the supplies are being held. It needs to be safe from Russian attacks while the preparations are being made. The troops need to be trained, and trained really well, so that they understand how to do these combined arms initiatives. You need all the range of equipment that Thomas Tyner was talking about, etc., 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 etc. This is a big thing. So that I'd be absolutely staggered if you had meaningful counter-offensives taking place in the next couple of weeks from the Ukrainians. I would even be surprised if it happens before the end of spring. I really think you've got to be looking at May, June, July onwards. But I may be wrong. They may be able to sort these things out quicker than that. It depends, what their objectives are. Obviously, they want to do this work before autumn then comes along, and you get the rains and the mud again. But they, striking while the iron is hot versus being prepared, and all of this. You might see some counterattacks and then like a small counter offensive put on near Bakhmut, depending on what they're deciding with Bakhmut. But that won't be anything to do with a larger counter offensive. And the argument could be that actually that would damage future counteroffensive capability if they're taking from that in order to pile that into Bakhmut to keep Bakhmut as a fixing attritional battleground for taking out Wagner and elite Russian troops in that area. Anyway, there is a bunch of long threads. Sorry if that's not what you were up for today, but it's what I gave you, like it or not. Thank you so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.